Imagine, if you will, that life is not everything you want it to be right now. Difficult, I know. You turn down for a night's rest, and in the beaming vastness of sleep, you dream. You dream of an island paradise where all your typical troubles, tribulations, and hardships are nowhere to be found. You dream of a village full of pleasant people that would give the shirts off their backs even to a complete stranger like you. And you dream of a particular individual, one that helps you and you eventually help in return, one that shares hopes, dreams, and desires with you during a quiet moment on the beach, one that you feel an incredible closeness to. And that closeness is completely reciprocated. And then you wake up, and it is all gone forever. This is the tragedy of Link's Awakening, one of the many reasons that it's one of the most beloved and well-remembered Zelda games of all time. Aside from Majora's Mask, I can't think of a single other entry in the series that receives as little criticism as this game does, even with the perspective of time dulling the impact of the hardware it was on. There's so much to discuss in this title, from the existential horror of what waking the windfish means to whether or not Link is even justified in his desire to do so. After all, everyone here seems happy on the surface. Who are you to rip that all away from them? I've heard Link's Awakening be described as, quote, the only Zelda game without a hero, and that just raises even more questions. Marine, the only character you form some kind of hard connection with, also shares your desire to wake the windfish and be free. Did she live on and become a seagull at the end? Is a figment of the windfish's imagination even truly alive? And what matters is that you're freeing the windfish from a coma-like state. Is everyone living on this island stuck in a similar, stale, endless perpetuity of existence, and releasing them is considered a mercy? Is anything that's happening here even real? After all, the proceedings are so radically different from Zelda's usual fare, so wacky and off the wall, yet filled with so many elements familiar to Link specifically, that you'd be forgiven in thinking that this might not be the windfish's dream after all. I don't want real answers to any of these questions, because no matter how you interpret it, Link's Awakening is a sad, somber journey that's stuck with players long after the credits rolled. And at the tail end of that journey, the very end of this whole sad affair, lies one of the best bosses in the entire series. The moment where this dream becomes a nightmare. What makes the horror effective in this game is how slow of a burn it is. It lulls you into a false sense of security with the old familiar formula of clearing out one dungeon at a time and grabbing all the goodies within. It even gradually builds your relationship with the most lovable character on this island just to make the reveal hurt even more. And yet, the mural you find in the ancient ruins detailing the reveal and the ominous warnings of the bosses beyond that point, this is all preamble. The realization didn't truly hit until after I collected all 8 of the instruments and opened a hole in the side of the windfish's egg to enter the final area. I did not complete the trading sequence that eventually leads to the trick you need in order to navigate this area correctly as a child. And this is where the weight of what I was about to do sunk in. Here, alone, far away from any sign of the peaceful island you've come to know, wandering, lost through the dark, identical halls might not have been enough to break me. But when it was combined with this music, there is an edge to this song, one that many tracks from actual dedicated horror games don't manage to capture. It fills you with a dread, the feeling that something truly horrible is about to happen. It makes the hair on my arms stand on end to this day, because I still remember what it felt like to realize that I wasn't about to just go face the forces keeping the windfish asleep. I was about to kill every single person on this island. And bear in mind, I was like 8 at the time. It freaked me out so badly that I shut the game off without even saving and didn't touch it for days. And when I did come back, I started scouring the island once more for literally anything else to do. I did not want to fight this boss. I got all the heart pieces, 20 secret seashells in order to obtain the level 2 sword, and finally figured out what to do with the fishing hook. Again, I was like 8. And when that item finally led me back to a hint about the egg, I realized there was no escaping it. This was going to happen no matter what. So, begrudgingly, I marched back in and followed the path. I didn't know what awaited me at the end, only that neither of us wanted this. Like genres in music, tropes in movies or TV, or writing styles in books, play enough video games and patterns start to emerge. The place where they're most notable being within the same franchise. Now, to an extent, this makes sense. A series risks alienating the precious player base they've built if the next entry is too radically changed from what they understand. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. Recognize what worked before and make it even better. But on the opposite end of this spectrum is where you'll find Assassin's Creed or the new Super Mario Bros. Series. Yes, I like hoppin' and boppin' on my DS as much as the next person. I didn't need 5 of these games released in less than a decade, which, coincidentally, is when video essays about the series' core design elements started popping up like daisies here on YouTube. The Mario formula is something that's so well understood and commonly understood at this point that Nintendo successfully monetized it yet again by handing players a toolkit and going, okay, do it yourselves, you're so smart. Zelda is similar, and jokes about Zelda bosses hiding their only weaknesses in their own homes have been around since Ocarina of Time. How do you beat Goma? Shoot it with the slingshot. How do you beat King Dodongo? Throw bombs at him. How do you beat Baronade? Well, those tentacles hanging from the ceiling look kind of vulnerable, and wouldn't you know it, I just found a conveniently placed boomerang in a chest a few rooms back. Isn't that a weird coincidence? Even final bosses usually don't require much more than a bow and some mastery over that game's swordplay. And this is why it's so special whenever something like Goat or Varen comes along and radically shifts the way you approach a fight. Especially for someone like Link, who has an entire utility belt of tools available to him by the end of the game. A good final boss should be one that serves as a final exam of all the game's mechanics. Nowhere has this ever been done better than in Link's Awakening. The Shadow Nightmare, as it's called, pulls its power from fear and anxiety that the person it attaches to possesses. And when Link comes rocking up to defeat it, naturally, it pulls from his fears to choose which form to take. 6 of them, to be precise. Form number 1 is known as the Giant Zole, a bigger version of foes you've been facing up to this point all over the island. Yes, these things are called Zoles, in case you're curious. And this is less the cute little beady-eyed version you've been seeing up till now, and more the original game's artwork kind. Ma! Strike at this thing with your sword, your main damage-dealing tool, and it dissipates into nothing, only to reform moments later. So you start trying other items. The bow and arrow, magic rod, the hook shot, the boomerang, a charge from your Pegasus boots. In a moment of desperation, you even try nailing it with a bomb blast, but nothing seems to work. This huge amorphous blob is seemingly invincible. Want to know the solution? Magic powder. Yes, that item you got back before you even set foot in a single dungeon to break Terran out of a curse and then never used again, is the only thing that can hurt the Giant Zole. Let this set the tone for what's to come. Now, if you care about the Zelda timeline, aka where and when these games happen relative to one another, Link's Awakening is canonically a direct sequel to Link to the Past and the Oracle games. This is important for why Form Number 2 is the way it is. I know it's kinda edgy to bring up the idea of trauma in a Nintendo game, but if there was anything that could shake the prophesized hero to their bones, it would probably be the people scheming to take over the Earth and destroy everything he's ever known. Go figure. Agonym is back in Pog form, and he's got his usual bag of tricks. He throws a fireball, and you tennis it back at him using your sword as a racket. This fight might cost you a few hits if you've never played A Link to the Past, because it might take you a few tries to catch on to how the fake fireballs work, and how you can't swat them back at him like the regular ones. A fun note, by the way, Awakening continues one of the weirdest and funniest traditions in any video game series. Can you punk this Zelda boss with a really funny item? If you're feeling brave, are confident in your timing, and want to utterly flex on this emo magic school nerd, you can parry his projectiles with a shovel. That is immersive! That is immersive! Remember how all of these forms are nightmares? How they're physical manifestations of your worst fears? I like to imagine Form Number 3 is a meta-commentary, in that it's not Link's nightmare, but yours. Reassuringly, Moldorm is not nearly as intimidating without pits for him to push you into and reset the battle with, so it's just a matter of sitting in the corner with your shield up until you get a chance to strike at his tail again. You actually fought the normal version of this enemy earlier in this very game, and it's kinda cathartic taking a second crack at him when you have more than a handful of heart containers and a beefed-up sword. So, on that note, who wants another Link to the Past reference? It's interesting, this fight. This was my very first Zelda game, so I had no idea how big of a deal this boss's form truly was at the time. But don't worry, this is a mere shadow of Ganon. No torches need to be lit to damage him, just wind up a spin attack, or even better, charge at him with your Pegasus boots. Careful though, because the blazing bats he summons and the trident he throws, just like in the original fight, hurt a lot, and they command a decent amount of what little space is in this tiny room. Careless players, or ones that think they're invincible just because they bought a health-restoring item, might find themselves with far less health than they'd prefer after this phase. So how do they up the ante on the Prince of Darkness himself? Curiously, it's with the little ball form these bosses have been taking in between every phase. Lanmola, no, not that one, doesn't have much of an attack strategy other than chasing you down. And not only does it have a myriad of weapons it's weak to, such as the magic rod, the boomerang, the hook shot, and even a simple spin attack from your sword, it only takes a single hit to stop it in its tracks. But this is a mislead. Merely a small dip in the battle's hectic pacing up to this point. It is the calm before the storm. This is a bit of a tangent, so bear with me. I wrote a story a while back that I tried to pitch on the SCP Foundation website. It revolved around a one-way sign that, when followed, led you to a dimension of your own personal fears. If you walked that path to the end, you'd be fine, but if you ever tried to go back, that's when those fears became real and could actually hurt you. Where things got really interesting is if multiple people tried following the sign at once, because then it had to compromise and come up with something more universal. I never ended up publishing it, but that concept of some primal fear, some unnaturally horrifying thing that all humans are instinctively terrified of, is still fascinating to me. And I think something similar is happening with the nightmares in this game, because their final form is the only one that has never been encountered before. Dethel is the name of this creature, the biggest boss yet, and one that practically smothers the battlefield with its giant swinging arms. Bosses like Dethel are the reason that, if you see an eye, shoot it is a hard and fast rule in the Zelda series, because the only way to hurt this thing is with your bow, and only when its one massive eye is open. Good luck landing those shots, though. Dethel moves erratically around the room, something they changed in the remake, by the way, constantly forcing you to adjust how you jump over its limbs and when you have the room and opportunity to fight back. If you're quick, you can even sneak 2 arrows in at once, a trick that becomes significantly harder after 8 arrows, when the arms start moving in a much less predictable pattern than before. This entire sequence makes Shadow Nightmare the most complex and difficult fight in the game, and, in my opinion, that's for the better. There really isn't another battle like this in the whole series, and somebody who's going into it for the first time has a hell of a puzzle to figure out ahead of them. It is a wild, grueling, and yet totally satisfying ride through every mechanic you've mastered over the game. But believe it or not, that's not my favorite part of this fight. Dethel reminds me a lot of a scene in the movie Little Nemo, where during Nemo's own trip to the world of dreams, he comes face to face with a nightmare. A being represented by large red eyes, big as the horizon ahead of them. And yet, that seems to be only a partial representation. These clouds, that lightning, that infinite pitch-black darkness behind those eyes, all, in some way, seem to be parts of this creature. The captain puts it best.
I've sailed through nightmare before!
It's not lurking in the skies, it is the sky. It's so impossibly big compared to even the blimp they're using that it could seemingly swallow them whole at any moment. And likely, already has. That is a beautifully terrifying concept for a moment that lasts less than 30 seconds of screen time in a children's movie. And that exact same iconography is here. This entire island is Dethel's realm. Its various monsters and even the previous forms, just lesser manifestations of the darkness lurking at its very core. Link is the small boy aboard that blimp, desperately fighting for his life against something that warps the very world around it to its whims. And yet, despite these overwhelming odds, he succeeds. He slays the darkness and wakes up to a familiar world, full of fresh new possibilities that are his to shape and make real. There's value in that fantasy. That fear can be so decisively overcome, and that in doing so, we become stronger and more capable beings. Now, I'm not delusional. The reality of people's situations is often much more complicated than that, but I think stories like this can give those folks having a hard time something to believe in. A precious drop of hope that there is a light at the end of their own personal tunnel. An end to their nightmare. Whew! Boy, does it feel good to be making videos again. If you made it all the way to the end of this, first off, thank you. I know a lot of the people that watch this, especially when it first releases, are folks that have been subscribed to me for half a decade or more, and I am extremely humbled and honored by your patience. Now, you only think you know what I'm going to say next, but oh, this is not your typical YouTuber call to action. Let's make this a push so strong that the momentum it builds will carry this series for the rest of its existence, and I'll never have to ask again. So yeah, like, comment, and subscribe, but also like and retweet the announcement post I made on Twitter. Share this in Discord servers, on Reddit, and in Facebook groups. Put it in front of your friends, family, and coworkers that like the same things you do. Anybody you think would be even remotely interested. And as for me, don't worry, I'll hold up my end of the deal and have this series finally live up to its namesake. So you can expect one of these every other Friday from now on. Until that point, thank you once again. My name is Whatthefnu. Later, everybody.